That was quite informative in terms of what the Lord was communicating to us. But as I look into Ezra chapter 4, and it was very challenging in terms of what the Lord really wanted to communicate to us this evening. And as we look into this, I'm going to give a bit of an overview to start with. Then we will look specifically at some of the verses that are there. Only 24 verses in this chapter. It's a bit, seems a little bit fragmented in terms of how it is presented or how it is read. But hopefully this will become more clear when we look at when we see or get an understanding from the overview that will be given and how this directs us here. So Ezra chapter 4. And with this, we're looking, the overarching theme really of this chapter is really talking about the dangers that we encounter in terms of partnership or working with others, and also in terms of how we cope with the challenges or, let me say, oppositions that we will face. And I say we will face, or we do inevitably face, as a result of doing the work of the Lord. And we will see from the example of Ezra, and there will be a number of others that will come to mind as well, of the challenges or the oppositions that they face when they endeavor to do the work of the Lord. So Ezra here, chapter 4, says that it gives us an understanding of the intense opposition that the people of God, the Israelites, the Jews who were returning, faced as they returned from exile, in order to rebuild the temple, first of all in Jerusalem, and also to build up the walls of the city that had been broken down. And as we do so, we will reflect upon several other individuals that were involved in this sort of work at this time. Different sort of focus, but they were in similar sort of time frame. We have Nehemiah that was involved here. We had the prophet Haggai, Zechariah that was involved in giving the word of the Lord for direction during these times here. So now we have Ezra that we'll be looking at, and he's a contemporary of Nehemiah. And also another name that we will have heard is Zerubbabel, who was also one of the other individuals that was involved during this time. And the book of Ezra tells us about a people group called the Samaritans. And we hear a lot about the Samaritans in the New Testament. But in the Old Testament, which is where they originated from, the Samaritans and other people who lived in Babylon at the time were considered as adversaries, enemies of the Jews who were returning with a primary objective of rebuilding the temple and also the city walls. And I want for that to really be noted, because that's what's evident as we go through with this year. And these Samaritans, as we will learn, offered to help the Jews who were returning, but they were rejected, so that the purity of the commission that these returning Jews had could be upheld. And the Samaritans used fear, bribery, and also made false accusations of rebellion in order to have the work stopped, because they themselves were rejected. And as a result of that, the work ceased for approximately 10 to 20 years. Some say 17, but it's between 10 and 20 years under the reign of Darius, who was king of Persia at the time. The key themes from this study in chapter 4 of Ezra, and we won't, it would have been good to have someone read all of those 24 verses, but because we're going to be looking at them in chunks or bite size, we won't need to read them all, but it'd be good for us to read that entire chapter. And we're just going to see how it is positioned in chronological order and the events that unfolded and what we can glean from them. So permit me to say here that there are some themes that jump out at us from these texts that we're going to be reading, and I want to just focus these. You may have see them slightly differently, but for the purpose of this study, the first one is what I call opposition or subtle opposition here, and that is chapter 4, verses 1 to 2. Just make note of that. And then decisive leadership, that is verse 3. We'll see that being played out. Discouragement and the tactics used to bring about that sort of discouragement in verses 4 to 6. And then political sabotage, I put it down as that, to prevent the work from going on. That is from verses 7 right the way through to 23. And we're going to unpack that a little as we go further. And then the last one is the last verse in verse 24, which is where the work stopped or ceased. And then we will see it had its setback, but then eventually they were able to resume the work and have at least the temple completed and head towards having the walls eventually being rebuilt here. So the adversaries here in verses 1 and 2, adversaries are often arrive with offers of help. The people of the land, the Samaritans, as well as the other mixed group of people that were around at the time, because Persia was the governing rule under the Babylonian Empire, and they had captured so many other nations around, brought them back into Babylon, and had them there living under their rule. So they were being oppressed. They were slaves, if you like, in a foreign land, and the Samaritans mixed with all of these people. So they were a very mixed bag, a very mixed up people. And that really needs to resonate with us as we study this chapter here, because that will really play a significant part in what unfolds with the events that we're going to be looking at here. And they sought to infiltrate and disrupt the project under the guise of cooperation. They were pretending that they were cooperating with these returning Jews here in verses 1 to 2. The applications that we will need to be making from these study is that we can look at these situations as events that has happened then, but what do they mean for us today? Also, looking at our situations, circumstances, focus, ministry, work, commission work, if you will, and whatever setbacks we will encounter. How does the study of Ezra and how the Israelites dealt with those oppositions, how do they apply to us today in dealing with our challenges and oppositions that we inevitably will face in doing the work of the Lord? So opposition comes with progress. Doing the work of the Lord often draws the attention and the opposition from the enemy. And we have a common enemy here, but he can come in many guises and many forms, as we will see. Secondly, the leadership and also the people need to be discerning. Not all help is good help. Compromise can pollute spiritual efforts, requiring a firm stand for truth. Note that. And then lastly, perseverance through trials, even when work is being halted or ceased by opposition. The pause is not a final defeat. The story continues to show God's ultimate victory, as we will see, or as we will be seeing in Ezra chapter 5. Now, I'm not going to go into chapter 5 because somebody else will be going into that as a particular study. But what we are looking at here, you will see how some of that really is unfolded or plays out in chapter 5, 6, and also 7 too. So expect opposition. When doing the work for God, resistance is inevitable. I'm restating some points here. Beware of counterfeit helpers. Not everyone claiming to support the ministry has pure motives or a proper foundation. Stand firm in one's decision. True dedication may require saying no to compromises that seem to be convenient or even a safe option. Satan is persistent. When one attack fails, another will come, requiring our alertness and readiness to act when faced with such. And lastly, God's timing is always perfect. Even when work is halted by external forces, God's ultimate plan is not thwarted, just delayed. So even though the work ceases for a moment and may seem to be prolonged, ultimately, God will ensure that his work is completed. So let's look at Ezra chapter 4, verses 1 to 2. And if I can have someone to just read those two verses for us, please, and then we will go into some details on that background. I'm not going to call any names if I can just get a volunteer. So, and I'm trusting that you have your Bibles with you so you can follow the text as we read.
The enemies of Judah
Mm-hmm.
and Benjamin heard that the exiles were rebuilding a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel. So they approached Zerubbabel and the other leaders and said, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God just as you do. We have sacrificed to him ever since King Esarhaddon of Assyria brought us here."
And that's it. Thank you. That's Candice, Minister Candice. Thank you.
Yes, Bishop.
So just those two verses, and just as those verses are being read, I believe so many things might be coming to your mind already in terms of how this is being presented. What we have here are the adversaries who were the Samaritans at this time, here making their presence known and felt to these Jews who had come with a commission and a mandate, if you will, from the king. Where they were king, sent them to Jerusalem to go and out of captivity, if you will, to go back to their homeland and to rebuild the city walls. Just like Nehemiah said, the walls that have been broken down needed to be rebuilt now. So Zerubbabel was one of those captives here that went back to, first and foremost, to rebuild the temple. And then, the temple sits within the walls of the city. So it was an extensive project requiring a lot of material, a lot of manpower, a lot of prayer, and a lot of cooperation, if you will. And with all of these ingredients, the Samaritans here, hearing that these Jews who had come back into the homeland now where they were, to come and rebuild the wall, to rebuild the temple and the city walls, uh, wanted to offer their help. Now, let me read something here. Judea was not completely empty at this time of inhabitants, even though they were in captivity. Some had been taken away, but they were allowed to. Some were returned to come back, and others remained uh, still in captivity under um, the governorship and the kingship of these ruling nation. At this time here, you had the king who was ruling over the people at this time here. Even though they were still in captivity and allowed to remain in the land and to live, pay the taxes to the ruling king, and to live some sort of lifestyle which for many had become comfortable. For many, they had it had become the life that they thought they would be living forever whilst they lived on earth. And these Samaritans, along with the other people group that were there with them, there was a lot of mix and intermarrying. Their worship had been diluted, so they were worshiping any gods that they felt comfortable to worship. It's a bit like what was said in Judges, because the rule of God was not evident. Everyone was doing what seemed to be right in their own eyes. So they were worshiping, they were living, they were practicing and doing whatever they felt they needed to do. Now here came these Jews, a group of Jews, dispatched from Babylon to back to Judah to go and rebuild the temple and the city walls. The Jews population of Judah was exiled in Babylon. There was a remnant descendant from the lowest and the poorest of the land that was left behind in exile. Jeremiah 39 and 10 will give us some references to that, combined with the few who had drifted into a largely desolate area in the land. The people were not happy. Now, when he says these people who remained and who were now living a seemingly comfortable lifestyle, were not happy that Judah and Benjamin had come back to Judea to therefore to rebuild the temple. Therefore, they were known now as the adversaries. Those who drifted into Judea were related to the Samaritans, those who brought into the lands of the former kingdom of Israel after its fall to the Assyrians in 733 BC, who had intermarried with those left behind after the exile. These are the Samaritans. In the two generations of exile after the fall of the kingdom of Judah, they had also expanded somewhat in the lands of Judah. So that had become a large contingency, a large group of people, many Samaritans, many mixed up people that were living there. The Samaritans continued as a people in the New Testament times because the Samaritans had some historical connection to the people of Israel. Note that their faith was was a combination of regulations and ritual from the law of Moses and various superstitions. So they were very much a superstitious people. Most Jews in Jesus' time despised the Samaritans, as we know from reading some of the New Testament texts, often more than the Gentiles, because they were considered to be, and I'm not, I use this term, it may seem derogatory, but it's a term that was used, that they were mixed or half breeds, who were thought to have this mixed up faith, and because they serve many gods, not one God, and still on the pretext that they were serving the one living and true God. This context is essential now in understanding the parable of the Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, as we have reference in Luke 10:25 to 37. 2 Kings 17:26 to 34 tells us that the attitude of the Samaritans was like this: they feared the Lord, yet they served their own gods according to the rituals of the nations from whom they were taken and carried away into Babylon. The background of the Samaritans now is that they were superstitious and they were an integrated people who had brought in different forms of worship into their lifestyle. So here it is. This was the current affair. And now they were being threatened, if you like, by a group of Jews who were returning to the land to rebuild the temple and the city walls. Now, how do you think they must have felt? They were living there with the temple broken, destroyed, the city walls broken down, damaged, seemingly beyond repair, and they were quite happy and comfortable with that. But now, a group of people came with the intent of rebuilding the city walls and the temple. How do you think the Samaritans would have felt hearing that and witnessing that at this time? I want to pose that question before we move on. Get some feedback on that. How do you think they would have felt? And it calls for us to put ourselves in their shoes, if you will, given the background, given the nature of how they were living, where they were, and what was happening at the time. I'm pretty certain they weren't so quiet. How do you think the Samaritans would have felt? How do you think? I want for us to use our imagination. How do you think they would have been? They would have seen this intention and the prospect.
They probably felt like they were going to be pushed out, because originally it was a Jewish populated place, and they were always kind of second class citizens, if you were, to the Jews, and so for them there was that animosity because they were half and half. They weren't fully Jewish, and so they must have felt like they were maybe would be driven out or would be outcast from those coming, and that they would, not the life that they'd built for themselves, so to speak, would now be challenged, because the Jews would have come there saying, well, this is our home, and then they would have been driven out. So they were probably intimidated by the fact that they were coming back, and they were then going to be driven out.
Thank you, Pastor Leo. Yeah. And on that basis of intimidation, because they were the bigger people group, this was a smaller group that was coming, but they still felt that they were intimidated by the possibility they were being shown up, because they considered themselves as worshippers too. And here was another group of people coming here that they should have been aligned to and aligned with. They were coming to rebuild the temple and the walls of the city that had been damaged beyond repair. So here they were rebuilding that. So that was showing them up. Wouldn't it be so? I can see a hand, Minister Candice.
Yes, Bishop, I agree with you, because if you have pure worship now being offered by this group, while the Samaritans adopted a somewhat blended approach to their worship, it would then highlight how far they are from pure worship.
Mm.
So I could see why they wouldn't want to welcome that as well.
Okay, thank you. And this is really what we can see being played out here, because as we will see from their approach to this group, and it will call for us to examine their their willingness and their sincerity, if you will, in the request and the proposal that they had put to to this group to join forces with them to have the work done. How sincere were they with that request, given how they must have been feeling at the prospect of these people coming to show them up for what they were lacking to do. Now, in the last couple of verses in chapter 3, I'm not going into that back into that necessarily, but we would have covered that. The last couple of verses there shows that as the people began the process of trying to rebuild the temple, they started with the foundation and just at the very basic work. There was some rejoicing and celebration as you read in chapter 3. I think the last couple of verses there, verses 12 and 13 of chapter 3, you will see how they were rejoicing. And in that, and that even that rejoicing was very mixed. It said that there were those that were weeping and there were those that were rejoicing. And the sound that was coming from that was very mixed, very uncertain. So you couldn't tell whether they were weeping or whether they were rejoicing. What a confusing sound that must have been. And but there was some excitement that was coming from that. And even the Samaritans hearing that, witnessing that, wanted to get a closer look at what was going on. So they came to the people and they then wanted to join forces with them, which is what we have read in verses 1 and 2 here. So they came and they said to them, "Let us build with you, for we seek your God as you do." Now I'm pausing with that because it's a very powerful statement, a very powerful request. And in one sense, it seems a very sincere request. But then my question is, how sincere was that, given where the Samaritans were sitting, how they must have been feeling, and what they were witnessing that was happening? They wanted to become partners in the building work, yet they were still considered adversaries. They wanted to partner in the work, either to ruin it or to influence it to their own personal benefit. Now, let's examine that. I mean, that I've made that statement. How valid is that? Is there any justification for making that statement? Because these people came with a what was considered, on the face of it, a very reasonable request. Let us give us an opportunity to work with you. We want to celebrate with you from what we have heard with the celebration. We want to weep with you from what we have heard. We want to build with you. We want to be a partner in this project that you are engaged in, building up the temple and rebuilding the city walls. So the proposal to unite in building the temple was a very carefully planned one. And I'm deliberately delaying in saying something else here because I want for us really to see how this is being played out. How sincere do we think or do we feel this request was as it was made to the returning Jews, and Zerubbabel being the main leader along with other leaders at the time? How sincere do we feel this request was?
I think bearing in mind, Sister Joyce, I think bearing in mind the intimidation, the threats, and that the Jews were coming and would make them accountable really for their lack of worship. I would say there's a lot of insincerity there. People wanting to sabotage or influence, as you say, probably more to influence it and get it to look the way and sound and feel the way that was comfortable for them. To have a say in it. That's one say, but I wouldn't have thought that it was genuine at all.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sister Joy. Anyone else?
Sister Margaret here.
Mm-hmm.
Verse 2 says that they came to Zerubbabel and the heads of the father's house and said, "Let us build with you, for we seek your God, as you do, and we have sacrificed to him since the days of Ezra Haddon,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
king of Assyria." It's saying, it's saying your God, and yet it's saying that we have sacrificed to him. It's a little bit confusing. It shows their insincerity. If really what they're saying has you do, they're not claiming him so much as their God,
Mm-hmm.
but as Judah and Benjamin as their God. So how sincere can that be? And because you've only read 2 verses.
Mm-hmm.
Zerubbabel was within his right to say no. You may do nothing with us. And sometimes people come offering their help, and as you've said, they really come with an ulterior motive. I know, and time will tell. But the language and the way they're using it to say, we want to be a part of this and whatever, whatever. And if the leader was not in touch with God, he would want to accept their help.
Very
But
good.
the spirit of discernment was there, that they knew exactly what it was all about.
Very good. Thank you, Sister Margaret. You're running ahead here with me.
Error, because it's
And you see, I have to smile at this because it's like somewhat we have the beauty of what they call it? How do you put it now?
Hindsight.
Hindsight. We have the beauty of hindsight, and with that, we can make a lot of judgments and so on. But taking that away, it calls for a willingness and an openness to hear what God really is saying in any given situation. So even though this proposal came as it did, if we listen to the words of it, we have to examine the words of the proposal and try to discern. You use the word there quite correctly. Discern the sincerity behind the request that is made, and in order to do that, we have got to be very strong and convicted and persuaded in the commission that we have been given, in order to discern and to detect whether what we are hearing aligns totally and complete with what we believe or not. Otherwise, we can be easily taken in by the request, depending on how it is presented. Yes, Minister Candice.
Yes, Bishop, good evening again. I think it would be fair to say the Samaritans were religious people in that they would go after anything that looked religious. And if I am to take that in our context today, sometimes you have some people who would just love and fascinated by church
Mm.
or religious organizations. So they will try out anything and they will give their time and effort to anything because they are just flexing. They like to be around happy church
Mhm.
people, and they have no real heart encounter. They are not fully committed. Um, so therefore they are willing to engage in anything goes, because after all it's church. How bad can it be? Like, we want to worship your God as well. Like, what's wrong with that? That's the way I read it, where they are just blending everything goes. It's still God, it's the same God. But what the scripture is showing us here is that even as we say the gospel is open to all, you have to be clear as to what what is open to all. There are some things that it's not for everybody, and
Very much.
there has to be that clear line established as leaders discern and ask God what to do and how to engage.
Very much so. And as we read this, and I'm praying and trusting that, because it really challenged me when I read this. and hoping that it really is capturing us in the same way, that really we have to look at how we interact, how we relate with others who are wanting to be a part of, because we will be presented with opportunities, proposals, if you will, and invitations that are going to, on the face of it, seem very genuine, sincere, um, but we have to be able to discern what is in alignment with what we are on, or and what is a threat. Otherwise, we can run the risk of even diluting the very belief and practices that we have. And the Samaritans came with that intent to dilute, because they were a diluted people, very mixed up, and they didn't want anything that was going to change that. It rather, they were going to join forces with anything that they could bring it under their umbrella and make it the same. Listen to the words. I'm coming to you. I see the hand, Sister Mavis. Hold that thought. I'm coming back to you on that. Hear the words that they use here, and this is what's so pivotal. We want to build with you, for we seek your God as you do, not our God, but we seek your God as you do. And then they went on to say, and we have sacrificed to him, that is to your God, since the days of Esarhaddon, king of Assyria. So how did they sacrifice to the Israelites' God, the Jehovah Jireh? How did they sacrifice to him as the children of Israel do, knowing that the temple had been broken down, the walls were destroyed, there was no priest there to give guidance and direction. So how were they sacrificing? How were they performing and doing and engaging in pure worship and service and sacrifice to the same God as the Jews do, without a priest and without any form of structured worship? How were they doing that? I'll leave that as a rhetorical question if you want. Sister Mavis, coming in on that one, please.
Good evening, Bishop. It's just a thought that comes to me that even in today's world,
Mm-hmm.
we would hear, especially the Muslim, they would say, offering their blessing, God bless you, but are they really talking about the blessing from the true and living God? And if we're not careful, we would take that blessing to say it's coming from the true and living God, which is where it's not, because they're not worshiping the true and living God, but they were ready to offer their blessing that we can run away with and say, you know what, he just blessed me, So we have to really discern and think of the word very carefully. And earlier on, the thought came to me, just as in the Garden of Eden, the discernment. It was so, if we never listen to the word, we would think it was right when the devil went to Eve and says, you shall be wise as gods. So the first bit sound away, but you have to listen to every word in details to see where does this come from. Is it aligned with the word of God? Because as I said before, that is a your God. Because if I'm doing something, I want to say our God or ownership, my God. So we have to listen to the words very careful and have a discernment.
Very good, very good. Thank you, Sister Mavis. Excellent. Because your and our is very different. Yours implies that it's very distant, it's not the same. Our implies that we have a relationship, we have the same belief, we have the same practice. And what was lacking for the Samaritans here was that relationship with the true and living God. And I posed the question, I did say, how were they performing those sacrifices to God without the priest? Because in order for the sacrifice to be acceptable and to be pure and true, the priest needed to play a major role and a major part in that. And obviously, they were lacking in the priest representation and also direction from the priesthood at this time. Okay, thank you for that. Really good thoughts there. But as we go on, we will see how the response was given here. And let me move quickly on to the response because Zerubbabel in verse 3 now rightly refuses their offer. But Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the fathers' house of Israel said to them, you may do nothing with us to build a house for our God, but we alone will build to the Lord God of Israel, as King Cyrus and the king of Persia has commanded us. Now, when I read this as a response to the Samaritans, on the face of it, it seemed very offensive to these people who came with seemingly a genuine request to support, to help, but they were blatantly and outrightly refused or rejected. Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the rest of the heads of the house of the fathers said to them, you don't have any part in this. You will not work with us, or we will not work with you in building this house. With one voice, they refused the help of the Samaritans. They did this knowing that they had permission. They, that is Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the people of Israel, that the Jews that came out under the command of King Cyrus to build the wall. They were commissioned to build a wall, to rebuild the temple. They had that commission. The Samaritans did not. And that is quite important for us to note here. That is why they refused and rejected the offer to work with them. And this really offended the Samaritans. And we can see that they were offended by their own response to the rejection. It was an important step of faith here to refuse a partnership that might have seemed helpful. We can imagine that there were a few pragmatists among them who said, we need any help that we can get. And you will always find this. We can guard ourselves against ungodly influences that they may bring. Now, these could be people amongst the very group with Zerubbabel who may have said, well, look, let's not be too hasty in rejecting this offer for help. We have some resources, but we may be lacking in some skills. We may be lacking in some quarters, and they may be able to assist us there and make up for the lack that we may have. And even if they have influences that we can consider ungodly, we can work with that. And we may be able to bring them around by our own influence. In weak or earthly circumstances of building work, there is often a serious temptation to take any help and to ignore the dangers of unwise and ungodly partnerships. Let me read on here. The Samaritans did not worship Jehovah as the Jews, but along with their own gods. And we have references in 2 Kings 17:25 to 41 there. To divide his dominion with others was to dethrone him altogether. If therefore it therefore became an act of faithfulness to Jehovah to reject the entangling alliance. This is what Zerubbabel did. Men of faith have often fallen into this blunder and have associated themselves with those not sharing their faith, and therefore, in the deepest sense, opposed to their enterprises. These leaders were not deceived, that is, Zerubbabel and Jeshua and the heads of the families. They detected the peril that was being presented to them. They did not accept the request. They discerned that this was not sincere. They discerned that this was wrong. They discerned that this was going to derail them, that this was going to distort their own, and this was going to cause them even to compromise on their own position and stance. Here, remember, the king, they said, had commissioned us, we who have come. The king did not commission the Samaritans. And so they had to be very careful who they engaged in the service. And it would have been quite practical and really acceptable for some, for them to engage laborers and others to help them do some of the work. And sometimes that's how the enemy works. He will present some things to us that seems very feasible, very practical, very helpful on the face of it, but in the long run, it's an opportunity for the enemy to deceive and to destroy. And remember what Jesus says: he's a thief, and he comes with one intention, with his presentation. That is, first of all, to deceive, to distort, but ultimately it is to destroy. So make no mistake when it comes to the enemy. Nothing that he presents is genuine. Nothing that he presents to us is going to be to our benefit and to our success. It will ultimately destroy us if we don't discern and realize what is happening. So discernment is important here in order to be able to do the right thing. It's important that we are able to discern. So decisive leadership is what is called for here. And Zerubbabel was able to manifest that in rejecting the request from the Samaritan. And there was unity amongst the Jews that came with him. There was no dissenting voices. They all could understand and discern and realize that what was being said, the rejection, was very much in alignment with the will and the purpose of God in order for them to fulfill the mission that they had been called and engaged in. Now let's look at discouragement and the tactics that the Samaritans use now by way of being rejected. Verses 4 to 6. If I can get someone to read that for me, please. Verses 4 to 6 of chapter 4.
The people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build, and bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose, all the days of Cyrus king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius king of Persia. And the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem.
And thank you, Pastor Leo. So we can see now the response of the Samaritans, and they really now showed themselves up. They really now manifested their true reason, their true their motive, if you will, was really now being shown up for what it is. Rejection brings this response from them. If they were genuine and being rejected, do you think their response would have been different?
Yes.
That's the simple answer.
I agree.
Why do we think so? Let me premise that on some text, because we do have, and we can support that with scriptures and examples. We have situations in the new, albeit some of them in the New Testament, where some things were said that could be considered very offensive, very off-putting, rejection, if you will. But the response was not here now to derail or to threaten any further, but was one of submission, and we can see that. I'm trying not to give the example. You know where I'm
Can
going
I
with
give an example that
Please do.
I can't remember exactly where the scripture is. It the Phoenician woman when she came, the woman that came to Jesus and said, wanted him to heal the daughter, heal somebody, and he said it's not good to give the children's bread to dogs.
That's right. That's the very one I'm thinking of. That's one. Very good.
And her response was that even the dogs
Yeah,
have
eat
the
from the
crumbs from the table
very much so.
because she had a need and she humbled herself.
Very much so. Very much so. So this is and I'm glad that you're citing that, because I wanted to bring that in as an example, because we're talking about discernment here, and Jesus is able to discern everything, and is helping us in the process of discernment, because we're not Jesus's little Jesuses, but we are called in our walk of life, in our leadership, to be able to discern when we are faced with requests and offers of support. We've got to be able to discern and detect when something is genuine or when it is false, in order to be able to help people. We do a disservice to individuals when we are not able to make that call, and we align with people and bring and give and make them feel a part of, when really they've not really had a relationship or experience in the way that they need to, and we make them feel comfortable in the way that we have accepted, rather than being outright and forthright in our, not so much rejection, but in our standing, so that they can see clearly where they need to be. Now, that's a good example that has been given here. Yes,
Yes,
sis?
I was looking and the verse about and it's saying that when you have to expect resistance when in the work of the Lord, because different trials will come about.
Mm-hmm.
And the discernment, got to have the discernment is needed in everything, because you have to beware of wolves in sheep clothing, becoming different guys to try to make a difference when they want to come to sabotage. So you have to be discerning. And like Zerubbabel, that he was discerning and he didn't compromise. He just because he refused, because they were not coming in alignment with what they were going on with that with Zerubbabel's group. So you have to be discerning and in the words that he's saying there in everything, and make sure you don't compromise with what you know that the Lord has told you to do, regardless to who comes, and offer their help, because when the enemy comes one way to try to get help, he don't give up if you think that the first victory is the last battle. Is not, because he's going to come in a different way again, because that's why they went about and get other people to come with them for the first place. When the Samaritans, they went and they hired different people to come with them. I don't know if I've gone too far.
No,
Anyway.
that's fine, Sister Iris. Very good, because that's where we're heading. In their response, you can see there how they were not genuine, and their insincerity was being shown up here in the way that they reacted to the rejection that they faced from Zerubbabel and the leadership. They were well upset, and as a result of that, he says the people of the land tried to discourage now the people of Judah. So because they were rejected, they wanted to prevent the people who have come with a genuine desire to rebuild the temple and the city walls. They were presenting themselves as if they were being genuine. in wanting to help to rebuild the temple and also the city walls. But now that they were rejected, they wanted to discourage the people from doing so. So they troubled them in the building, and they hired here. They used their influence and their force to hire counselors against the people to frustrate their purpose. And then they did this for a long time in the days of King Cyrus, king of Persia, even until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. So this time here between these two kings here, Cyrus and Darius, and when I look at how long they reigned, I mean, one reigned for nearly 20 years, the other one for 40 years. So we're not talking about a couple of days and weeks and months. We're talking about years of opposition, years of frustration, years of discouragement, years of opposition to the work. So you can imagine now how the work was being affected by these Samaritans, which were now showing themselves up, and they're showing their true colors. And they hired people to help them hinder the work from going on. So it is said that the people of the land tried to discourage the people of Judah. This response to the refusal of partnership revealed their evil intent. If they could not attack the work through a subversive partnership, they would then attack the work by discouraging the workers, troubling the builders, and lobbying against them in the court of Cyrus. And we can see this really being played out here all the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, until the reign of Darius, king of Persia. And between chapters, in chapters 4, between verses 4 right through to 23, the whole of this is being played out here. We can see how their opposition was being played out, and how they engaged themselves and positioned themselves now to frustrate the work. They began, first of all, by resisting the work and in employing the people here, the people who would influence to help them. They were sabotaging the work. And I put it down like this: political sabotage. They strategically position themselves to employ all of the means at their disposal to bring about an end, if you will, to this work that was being proposed to be done. There are two kings here that we also need to bring into play here. And these verses here, from verses 5, 6, right the way through to 23, it doesn't seem as if it sits within this chapter when in the reading. It seems as if it's because these are we'll see how these play out later on, because it is covering a period here of some kings and what giving us an overview of how the opposition was really being played out, and the length of time that it took for this to be happening. And I've given us here that a broad span of between 20 and 40 years that this opposition was going on. These two kings, Ahasuerus and Artaxerxes, these were two kings that came up during this time under this reign, and they were very much instrumental in the work that was being done and the opposition that was being played out here. Verse 6, the resistance under, first of all, Ahasuerus, this king from 485 to 465 BC. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. So here we see that they employed the political domain in bringing. They went to the top and ensured that they received letter from the king to have the work cease. And how did they do this? They went to the king and they informed the king of the work that the Israelites had done in the past, that they had an history. And their history was one of, they said, rebellion, and also not adhering to the leadership and to the rule that they were placed under. So if you allow these people to continue, this the same thing is going to happen again. History is going to repeat itself. And moreover, and I'm jumping ahead here, because we may not be able to read all the verses, they even went so far as to say, well, look, what they did before and they're trying to do again now, if you allow this, it is even preventing us from paying taxes to you. They did this in the past and they failed to abide by the ruling and didn't pay their taxes, which they did. But they lionly and embellished the truth here, by indicating, I was stating that they didn't. But they said, now, if you allow them to go ahead, they're going to even prevent us who are your loyal and willing servants to pay our taxes. So if you allow them, they're going to even prevent us from paying the taxes that is due unto you. And King, if you do this, it is going to undermine even your very authority and reign here in this land. And I'm just jumped ahead here to just bring all of that into play to show you what they did in their attack and in their rebellion. So this sabotage here brought in political reign to bring this about. And you can see this in verses 7 right through to 16. We won't be able to read it all here now, but in your own time, read that and you will see all the things that they said. First of all, they said, the Jews who came up from you, they got the king to to go back into the archives, retrieve the letters, because the history is there, the report is there. Find the report and you will see for yourself what they did. And it said here that they brought up a copy of the letter and they sent this to the king. And the letter says, to the king Artaxerxes, from your servant, the men of the region beyond the river, and so forth. Let it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you have come to us at Jerusalem and are building the rebellious and evil city and are finishing its walls and repairing the foundations. Let it now be known to the king that if this city is built and the walls are completed, they will not pay tax, tribute, or custom, and the king's treasury will be diminished. You hear that? Now, because we receive support from the palace, that is, we, the Samaritans, and others, it was not proper for us to see the king's dishonor. Therefore, we have sent and informed the king that search be made in the book of the records of your fathers, and you will find in the book of the records. And now, and know that the city is a rebellious city, harmful to kings and provinces, and that they have incited sedition within the city in former times, for which cause this city was destroyed. Rightly so, correctly so. This was destroyed as a result of their rebellion, but the rebellion was rebellion against God. And so the Lord allowed them to be captured and have it destroyed. But you see how truth was being misrepresented here for the benefit and for the purpose of the Samaritan and their opposition? They went on to say, we inform the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls are completed, the result will be that you will have no dominion beyond the river. My God, that says it all, doesn't it? And you can imagine how the king responded to this. Having received the record, the letter, it's in black and white, and you can't deny what is recorded in history. History is there for our learning. History is there for our understanding, for to help us to make decisions, even for where we are at. And as a result of this, the king, how do you think he responded, having heard this?
Panicked.
Panicked? Is they panicked?
Yes, Bishop.
He's king. Why would he panic?
Because he's losing subjects and losing taxes. Like no king wants their reign or their dominion, the area that they have responsibility over, to be diminished.
Mm-hmm. Is anyone have anything different to that, or any other enlightenment on that? How do you think he responded? It is said that he panicked and feared his dominion being diminished. He felt threatened by these few Jews that were coming to rebuild the city.
He stopped the work.
Yeah, stop it. You threatened, you stop.
He's
Well,
big.
first of all, they told him to look into the archives,
Mm-hmm.
and what he found was
Mhm.
it was so that these things happen. But as you said, it was not as a result. The wickedness was because it was against God. But it's like some people see evidence everywhere. Evidence can, you can fabric, you can see something and take it in a totally different light. They say that statistic can be used to prove anything.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So but the thing is, he was concerned. He was very concerned. uh, as Minister Candy said, it's going to be losing revenue and all of that. But then it proved that they did pay their taxes. They did. So that was proof. And I kind of read something that says Ezra, that must have made him feel really good, to know that evidence was there, that the people, they did pay and all of that. But we know that they weren't taken, and the city wasn't destroyed because of the evil to the king. It was because they were disobedient to God.
Very much so. Very much so. So the king was troubled by this report that came back, of the history of these people who were given the liberty, the freedom, to rebuild their temple, rebuild their city, to become a people again. And when I think of this and how this must be for the enemies of Israel even today, who may feel threatened by these people if they are allowed the potential of what they think they will do and can do. And so the king, well, when he panicked, but was troubled in his spirit and wanted to show and demonstrate who is really in charge, who is really in control here. I mean, after all, who's the captive, and who's the and who's the ruler, and who's the captive here? So he was not going to have his dominion overruled or overrun in any way, shape, or form. He was going to demonstrate who really is in charge. And so his response really was to these Samaritans that came with the letter here, to give them now another letter, another commission, because he now was reigning, and he was going to give them the letter now to go and ensure that these people who had, remember, a letter from a king, King Cyrus, to come and rebuild the temple wall. So one king to another. See, he was going to demonstrate that he was going to overrule whatever they had, and show that now he is not going to allow them to destroy and to diminish what he has. And so the letter was given to these Samaritans to go and have the work cease. and to prevent the work from going on. And they did this with excitement. And I'm just looking for the verse here now to just show how quickly they went and to have the work stopped. In from verse 17 to 23, we'll see that coming out here. So to Rahum, the commander, and to Shimshai, the scribe, to the rest of their companions who dwell in Samaria, and to the remainder beyond the river, peace and so forth. The letter which you sent to us has been clearly read before me, and I gave the command, and search has been made, and it was found that this city in former times has revolted against kings, and rebellion and sedition have been fostered in it. There have also been mighty kings over Jerusalem, who have ruled over all the region beyond the river, and tax, tribute, and custom were paid to them. Now give the command to make these men cease, that this city may not be built until command is given by me. Take heed now that you do not fail to do this. Why should damage increase? Why should damage increase to the hurt of the kings be made? Now, when the copy of the King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rahum and Shimshai, the scribe, and their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem against the Jews, and by force of arms made them stop the work. So we see how opposition played out here. And the work now was given a command to stop, because the king had overruled what was given before and ensured now that the work would not go on until he says so, until he gives the clearance and the go ahead. And I may not be able to go on here. I'm going to be coming to an end here on this point here. He says the work will stop until I give the go ahead. And the work did stop. And it says here that for about nearly 20 years, no work was able to continue to complete the work. It was frustrated, it was delayed, because the king had made another decree, and it was enforced by the Samaritans and the those that they co-opted to work with them, so that no work on the temple could continue until the king gave the go-ahead. But let me ask the question, who has the final say? When the enemy makes a stance, when the enemy comes and he frustrates, when the enemy comes in, the scripture says, like a flood, who lifts up the standards? Who has the final say? When the enemy wants to prevent us, the people of God, from fulfilling our responsibility and our duty and our call into engagement in his service, when he wants to frustrate our efforts, when he comes as a thief to steal and to kill and to with the intent of destroying, who has the final say? For the things that are seen are only temporary, but the things that are not seen are eternal. Who has the final say? When the enemy says, you will not succeed here, when the enemy says, we will not win, who has the victory? Who has the final say? There is a song that we sing, and I wish I could sing it here. Who has the final say? Jehovah has the final say. So let us not be overly troubled and concern by the oppositions that will come and do come. It's a lesson that we can take away from this here this evening. Let's not be troubled or be worried. Let us not be panicked into a response when the enemy confronts and when the enemy comes to deceive and to destroy. But let us take a stance and let us be decisive like Zerubbabel. And let us, with the spirit of discernment, with the direction and the guidance that the Lord gives, let us, and the forthrightness that He provides us with, let us stand on His word. Let us remain true to the calling and the purpose for which He has called us. Yes, the enemy may frustrate and will frustrate our efforts, and he may seem to delay the work, but he will not defeat the work. He may seem to have some success now in delaying our work, but he will not be able to defeat us who have the victory in Christ. For we can do all things through Christ who gives us the victory now and again and again. Who has the final say? Jehovah has the final say. So when we align ourselves with him, his purpose, and the calling, and know who has called us and engaged us, and we stand on his word, there is no need to worry or to panic, but to stand sure, as the scripture says, and having done all to stand, stand firmly convicted and persuaded that we have the commission and we are going to rebuild the temple. We're going to rise up, as our theme for this year is, and we're going to build. And when we are invited to come down, like Nehemiah was, we are going to say, we cannot come down, for we are doing a good work. And when we are called to look to the right and to the left, like Joshua, we're not going to look neither to the right or to the left, but we are going to be courageous and take the stand and remain true to the calling and the purpose for which we have been engaged. For who has the final say? God has the final say, and he has called us, equipped and enabled us, and empowered us to stand and remain true to his calling. Can I invite us to end this here? I'm going to stop here and end this with this prayer here tonight. Because when we trust God, we know that the work is going to succeed. It's going to be completed. And Ezra 4:24 tells us that the work of the Lord was completed when the timing was right. God knows. And what he allows now may seem like a delay, may seem like it's prolonged, but he has the final say, and the victory is already secured. We just have to stay the course, remain faithful, and let him complete what he has started in us and through us. Can we unmute at this time? And can we have a prayer collectively for the Lord to align us with his purpose, with his will, so that we can make the necessary call and discernment when it is called for, and we can do so with conviction.